It started innocently enough, like every road trip I had ever taken, windows down, the hum of the tires against the asphalt, the open road stretching far ahead. But the moment I saw that sign, a flickering, half-broken highway marker that read, "Welcome to Millwood," I should have turned around. I didn't, and now I'm sitting here in the dark, writing this to warn others, hoping that someone out there will believe me. It's funny how a seemingly normal day can unravel into a nightmare so quickly. I had been driving for hours, making my way through small towns and countryside backroads. The air was crisp, the setting sun casting long shadows across the highway. My car, old and rusty, but still reliable, groaned beneath me, and the quiet hum of the engine almost lulled me to sleep. I didn't plan on stopping at Millwood. It wasn't even on my map. But as I approached a fork in the road, I saw that sign. The old highway was barely visible, overgrown with weeds, and there were no other cars in sight. Something drew me in, an inexplicable compulsion, like a thread pulling at my gut. I took the turn. At first, Millwood looked like any small, run-down town, no more than a few crumbling buildings, an abandoned gas station, and what seemed like a single lane cutting through it all. The place felt off, the air heavy with something I couldn't put my finger on. I pulled over by the edge of the road, thinking I'd just stretch my legs and take a quick look around. The hairs on my neck stood up, a chill running down my spine. The town was dead quiet, not a single soul in sight, which only made it more unsettling. I turned the engine off and stepped out, the gravel crunching beneath my boots. That's when I saw it, the thing that would change everything. A figure, standing motionless in the shadows of an alleyway. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, a person blending into the darkness. But then I realized no one stood like that. The way it moved, slow, deliberate, was unnatural, like it wasn't quite human. My breath caught in my throat as I squinted, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. But the figure didn't move any closer. It just stood there watching me, its face hidden beneath a cloak of darkness. I could feel its eyes on me. I could almost hear its thoughts. Suddenly, a shriek pierced the silence, high-pitched, like 1,000 nails scraping against glass. I snapped my head to the sound, and that's when I saw it. The town, it wasn't empty after all. The shadows around the buildings seemed to ripple, as if something was moving within them. Figures, more than one, emerged, their faces twisted, their bodies contorted in ways that defied nature. They moved silently, circling, closing in around me. Panic surged through me as I ran back to my car, fumbling with the door handle. The figures didn't chase me. They simply stood there watching, their eyes glowing in the dim light. But it wasn't until I slammed the door shut that I realized how stupid I had been. It wasn't the first time something like this had happened. Back in college, I had been part of a group of friends obsessed with urban legends and folklore. We took it upon ourselves to travel across the country, seeking out creepy spots and old ghost stories. We weren't prepared for the reality of what we found. The first town we stumbled upon had a similar feel to Millwood, abandoned, with an air of dread hanging over it. We were intrigued by the stories at first. The locals spoke of a curse, of spirits that roamed the land, and warnings to avoid the highways that cut through the town. But we were naive, thinking it was just superstition. We wanted to prove the ghost stories wrong, to make our mark as fearless explorers. That was when we found the road. The highway was an unmarked stretch of asphalt that led nowhere, a forgotten path buried deep in the woods. The locals called it the cursed route. No one dared travel it, but we did, foolishly. We got lost within hours, the woods closing in around us, the trees becoming thicker and darker. The air grew heavier, suffocating, and the temperature dropped despite it being summer. And that's when we heard it, the soft whispers, just on the edge of hearing, calling us deeper into the forest. We should have turned back, but we didn't. Our curiosity drove us forward, until we stumbled upon an old, dilapidated cabin, its windows boarded up, and its door slightly ajar. Inside, We found things that weren't human, old rituals, symbols painted on the walls, and in the center of the room, a strange circle of stones, each one etched with an unfamiliar language. We didn't know it then, but the moment we crossed into that cabin, we had already broken the first rule, the one that said we should never, ever disturb the resting place of the spirits that haunted the land. The ground beneath us trembled, and a low growl rumbled through the walls. The whispers grew louder, and the room began to shift and distort, like the very fabric of reality was tearing apart. The air grew thick with malice, and before we could react, the door slammed shut. That was the last time I saw my friends. I woke up in my car, miles away from the cabin, with no memory of how I got there. The others were gone. I searched for days, but there was no trace of them, no evidence that they had ever been there. All I had left was the strange mark on my wrist, an intricate symbol burned into my skin, and the haunting whispers that still echoed in my ears. Back in Millwood, things were just as I remembered them. The figures surrounding my car had not moved. They simply waited. I didn't know what they wanted, but I knew one thing: they weren't going to let me leave. I slammed my foot on the accelerator and sped off down the road, not looking back. The figures faded into the shadows as I drove, but the feeling of being watched never left. I'm writing this now, days later, as I try to make sense of it all. I know what I encountered that night in Millwood wasn't just a nightmare, it was real. And it's not over. The whispers have started again. They follow me, calling my name, urging me to return to the highway. I don't know if I'm losing my mind or if something truly evil is hunting me, but I do know one thing for certain. There are places in this world where darkness lies, and if you stray too far from the path, it will come for you. So, I warn you now, don't ever take that road. Don't ever stop in places like Millwood, where the shadows hide something far worse than you can imagine. And whatever you do, never cross the forgotten highway. It's already waiting for you. It was supposed to be the road trip of a lifetime, just a getaway to escape the monotony of life, and to enjoy some quiet time in the scenic countryside. But what began as an idyllic journey would soon turn into a nightmare that would haunt Emma for the rest of her life. It was late September when Emma, a 29-year-old graphic designer, decided to hit the road. She packed her bags, loaded her car, and set out from the bustling city of Atlanta, hoping for a peaceful weekend away in the mountains. Her route was scenic, taking her through winding roads and little-known towns, places she had never seen before. It was the perfect escape, at least that's what she thought. The road was eerily empty as Emma drove deeper into the forested landscape. The trees seemed to stretch on forever, their dark, towering trunks casting long shadows on the road. The sun was setting, and a thin fog began to roll in, blurring her vision and creating an almost suffocating atmosphere. As she passed a small, unmarked intersection, she noticed a dilapidated sign that read, "Welcome to Wrenwood." It looked like a town forgotten by time. Curiosity piqued, Emma decided to take a detour and explore. She drove through the crumbling streets of the town, her headlights flickering over rundown buildings and abandoned houses. The air was heavy with silence, not a single soul in sight. It was as though the entire town had been deserted for decades. Suddenly, she heard a soft tapping sound on her window. Emma froze, her heart racing. She turned her head slowly, but there was no one there. A shiver ran down her spine, and she instinctively locked the doors. She was about to drive away when the tapping came again. Louder this time, more persistent. With trembling hands, Emma rolled down her window just a crack, enough to hear a voice that sent chills through her. "You shouldn't be here," a raspy voice warned, its tone dark and filled with malice. "They're watching." Emma's breath caught in her throat, and she slammed the window shut, her mind racing. Who could have said that? Who was watching? She didn't want to find out. Without a second thought, she floored the gas pedal and sped out of the town. But as she drove away, the road seemed to twist and bend in unnatural ways. The trees became more dense, and the fog thicker. It felt as though the very earth beneath her was alive and pulling her deeper into something dark. She looked up at her rearview mirror and saw headlights following her. The figure of a large black truck, its grille glowing ominously through the fog, kept pace with her no matter how fast she went. Her hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. Panic surged through her veins as she pressed harder on the gas. The truck was getting closer, the distance between them shrinking with each passing second. Then, out of nowhere, the truck swerved in front of her, blocking her path. Emma slammed on the brakes, screeching to a halt inches from the massive vehicle. For a moment, everything was still. The truck's engine revved, and then, from behind the wheel, a figure emerged. He was tall, his face hidden beneath the brim of a weather hat. He stepped toward her, his boots echoing on the pavement. "Get out of the car," the man ordered in a low, gravelly voice. Fear gripped Emma, but she was no coward. She opened the door slowly, trying to control her breathing. "What do you want from me?" The man didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stared at her with cold, lifeless eyes that seemed to pierce through her very soul. "You've been warned," he said quietly. "They're coming for you." "Who?" Emma asked, her voice shaky. "They're coming," the man repeated, his voice now tinged with something far darker. "The spirits of Wrenwood. You've crossed into their domain. There's no way out." Emma's heart raced. She backed away slowly, still staring at the man. But before she could retreat into her car, the man grabbed her arm with surprising strength. His grip was like iron, and his touch burned, sending waves of dread through her. With one final, chilling laugh, the man released her and retreated back to the truck. "You should have listened," he muttered, his words trailing off as the truck revved to life and drove away, disappearing into the fog. Shaken and terrified, Emma fumbled for her keys, unlocking the car door as quickly as she could. But before she could even pull away, the fog thickened again, and the lights flickered. Then she heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps dragging across the road. Out of the mist emerged a figure, pale, gaunt, and with eyes that seemed to burn with a malevolent fire. It was a woman, her skin stretched taut over her bones, her hair a tangled mess of blackened strands. Her mouth hung open in an eternal scream, but no sound escaped. The air around her was thick with an oppressive weight, as though the very air itself was alive with evil. Emma slammed the car door shut and locked it, her heart hammering in her chest. She turned the key in the ignition, but the engine sputtered. The figure was getting closer, her bony fingers reaching out as if to claw at the windows. Suddenly, the car started, and Emma floored the gas pedal, leaving the ghostly woman behind. But no matter how fast she drove, the road seemed to stretch endlessly in front of her, twisting and turning like a living nightmare. And all the while she could hear the faint whisper of a voice, growing louder with every passing moment. It was the voice of the woman. "You can't escape," it hissed. "You'll never leave Wrenwood." But Emma didn't listen. She didn't stop. Her eyes were locked on the road ahead, her hands gripping the wheel so tightly her fingers were numb. She wasn't going to let this cursed town swallow her whole. She refused to let it. As the night wore on, Emma's sense of reality began to slip away. The trees, the road, the houses, they all blurred together, becoming a dark, twisted blur. And in the distance, she saw Wrenwood's church, looming in the distance, bathed in a sickly, unnatural light. A memory surfaced in her mind, a memory of the man who had warned her, the one who had said, "They're coming for you." Emma's foot slammed on the brake. The church. It was a trap. With the scream of the tires, she tried to turn the wheel, but it was too late. The car lurched forward, and before she could react, she was thrown into darkness. When Emma awoke, she was lying in a darkened room, her head spinning. She tried to sit up, but her body felt heavy, like something was holding her down. The walls of the room seemed to move, the shadows shifting in ways that didn't make sense. As she tried to focus, a cold, familiar voice echoed in the room. "They're here." It was the man from the truck. "You've met them now," he continued, his voice low and mocking. "The spirits of Wrenwood. They've been waiting for someone like you." Emma's breath caught in her throat as she realized what he meant. The woman she had seen in the fog. The spirits of the town, they weren't just haunting Renwood. They were a curse that could never be broken. She had stumbled into something far darker than she could have imagined. And now, there was no escaping the horrors that Renwood held within its forgotten streets. The curse had marked her, and now she was part of their story. A story that would never end. Jenna had never been one to turn down an adventure, so when she and her boyfriend, Mark, decided to take a spontaneous road trip through the rural parts of the Midwest, it seemed like the perfect way to break away from the grind of city life. They had planned the trip for weeks, and now, with the open road ahead, it felt like the beginning of something special. The night was already beginning to fall when they entered the town of Ravens Hollow, a small, seemingly innocuous place tucked away in the dense woods. The town's few lights flickered weakly, and the air felt heavier than usual, as though it were pregnant with something unspoken. But neither Jenna nor Mark thought much of it. After all, it was just a sleepy little town, or so they thought. They parked near the edge of town, where an old diner caught their attention. It looked like something straight out of the 50s, with its flickering neon sign reading open 24 hours. Starved and tired from the drive, they decided to stop for a quick bite. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of greasy food and stale coffee. The place was eerily quiet, save for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint buzz of the neon sign outside. The waitress, a woman in her early 40s with a hollow look in her eyes, barely acknowledged them as she led them to a booth in the back. "What can I get you?" she asked flatly, her voice devoid of emotion. Jenna smiled uneasily. "Just a couple of burgers and fries." "Thanks." The waitress nodded, turned without another word, and shuffled toward the kitchen. The silence between Jenna and Mark felt oppressive, and they exchanged an uneasy glance. "Something's off about this place," Mark murmured, his gaze flicking around the diner. Jenna nodded but didn't reply. She felt it too. There was an undercurrent of tension in the air, something unnatural. She chalked it up to tiredness and the isolation of the town. But the gnawing unease wouldn't leave. After a long stretch of silence, the waitress returned with their food. She placed it in front of them without a word, her eyes never meeting theirs. Jenna took a bite, but it tasted wrong. The burger was dry and flavorless, and the fries were limp, coated in some kind of greasy residue. "Let's get out of here," Mark said suddenly, his voice tense. "This place feels like a tomb." Jenna's stomach churned as she wiped her mouth with a napkin. She agreed, but when she stood up, the diner door slammed shut. The sudden noise was deafening, and before either of them could react, the lights flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness. "Did you hear that?" Mark whispered, his voice barely audible in the sudden quiet. Jenna's heart pounded in her chest as she fumbled for her phone. But when she turned on the flashlight, she realized with horror that it wasn't just the power that had gone out. The diner, the town, the world outside seemed to be swallowed by an unnatural blackness. She couldn't see past the windows. It was as though they were trapped in a void. A deep growl emanated from the kitchen. Mark's breath hitched. "Jenna, this isn't right. We need to leave. Now." But as they turned to leave, the waitress reappeared, her movements jerky, like a marionette on a string. Her face was twisted into a grotesque grin, but it was her eyes that sent a chill down Jenna's spine. They were dark and hollow, as if her soul had long since been drained. "You can't leave," she croaked, her voice sounding like 1,000 voices whispering from the depths. "You're already too far in." Jenna's blood ran cold. "What do you mean? We're leaving now." But the waitress didn't move. Her hand slowly reached out, and the air around them thickened with an oppressive force, as if something malevolent was watching, waiting. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, and the walls seemed to pulse, as though they were alive. The ground trembled beneath their feet. "Leave, now," Mark screamed, pulling Jenna toward the door. But as they tried to escape, the door slammed shut with an ear-splitting crack. They were trapped. The diner's walls started to shift, the space stretching and contracting, as if the very fabric of reality was distorting around them. Jenna's heart raced in her chest, the air growing heavier with every passing second. The temperature dropped, her breath becoming visible in the icy air. Mark pulled at the door, desperate to escape, but the locks were frozen shut. The windows were covered by a thick, impenetrable fog, and outside, Jenna could swear she saw figures, moving shadowy forms that flickered in and out of view like ghosts. Suddenly, the growl came again, louder this time, accompanied by a horrific scraping sound. From the kitchen emerged something so grotesque, so hideous, that Jenna's mind couldn't comprehend what she was seeing. It was tall, hunched over, with skin that looked like rotting leather, and eyes that burned with an inhuman fury. It was not human, it was something far worse. With a scream, Jenna grabbed Mark's arm, pulling him away from the door as the creature lumbered closer, dragging its clawed hands across the floor. Its grin was impossibly wide, stretching to the corners of its face. "You shouldn't have come here," it hissed. The creature reached for them, and in that moment, the diner's walls began to crack open, revealing the true horror of Raven's Hollow. The town was a trap, a place where souls were damned to wander for eternity, feeding the darkness that thrived in the depths of the forest. The creature wasn't just hunting them, it was the town's guardian, ensuring that no one left once they entered. Mark shoved Jenna towards the back door, and for a fleeting moment, she thought they might escape. But the moment her hand touched the handle, a voice whispered in her ear, icy cold, "You can never escape the hollow." Jenna's blood ran cold as she turned to face Mark, who was now staring at her with wide, terrified eyes. And then, with a sickening crack, his body twisted unnaturally, his mouth opening in an agonizing scream. The creature had him. Jenna stumbled backward, tears streaming down her face as she realized there was no escape. No one who entered Raven's Hollow ever made it out. And now, she was part of its curse, forever bound to its twisted existence. The last thing she heard was the sound of the creature's laugh, echoing in her mind as the walls of the diner closed in on her, darkness consuming everything.